It was 1976, and Louisville and southern Indiana were in a major conflict. The subject, Marble Hill, a new nuclear power plant being built less than 30 miles from Louisville. The radio and newspapers were filled with stories almost every day about bad welding, falsified construction x-rays. The thought of having our own 3-mile island, well, it was just too large a story to ignore. So when Ron Gronison, my friend in the WHAS news department, suggested he might be able to get a budget for the production and for it to be produced at Trax, I said, sure, let's do it. He wanted to do it at Trax as opposed to WHAS because he had a very unique approach to the production and knew that together we could pull it off. And just a note of explanation, Ron Gronison used the name Ron Notar on the air. So now, another award winner, Marble Hill.
Of all the news stories you've heard recently, which ones immediately come to mind? This is Glenn Baston. You may be thinking of school desegregation, abortion, maybe the death penalty, all somewhat controversial. The latest in the category in Kentuckiana is nuclear power. Public Service Indiana has a preliminary okay to build a nuclear power plant near Madison. Some site work is already underway. However, a license for the plant has not been granted, and opposition to the plant has grown so that this is becoming the most contested of the nuclear plants. For the past 6 weeks, Ron Notar has explored this controversy. He talked with those leading both sides, some who are in the middle, with those who will be directly affected, and those who think they will be indirectly affected. This program contains their words. In some instances, it contains Notar's interpretation, either in his words or in songs written especially for the power plays for Marble Hill.
Indiana 62 is like any other state road that winds its way through the bottomlands of Hoosier country. It's pretty heavily traveled, and there isn't anything particularly memorable about it unless you look hard. Finding yourself on it some crisp early autumn evening, driving through a section of unspoiled woodlands except for where the road meanders, a cast of thousands of leaves perform airworthy ballet as if to imply they'd like to shelter you along with the other simple life forms they give up their life protecting each winter. There's a light frost on the fall corn tassels. The jack-o'-lanterns which smile at you through rural home windows are a reflection of what we all are intimately aware of. Soon, much of our needed warmth and love will have to glow from within us if our life, however wild or tame, is to be sustained. As you look east toward Madison, Indiana, across farmland of good Ohio Valley soil, you realize that you're just southwest of Hanover and must soon turn off the main road in order to get to Marble Hill. You go south toward the Ohio River. If it's Sunday, you may see a young farmhand plowing under a field and preparing it for winter rye. He'll have his portable radio attached to his tractor, listening to a football game or to country music. You may see the old pro pulling grain and smoking a freshly cut corncob pipe. Grandpa will be playing basketball at the hoop nailed on the tobacco barn and babysitting with his great-grandson who never even notices Papa is 0 for 10 from the free throw line. The dirt is more interesting. It's something in the heredity. One of the girls is out on 800S riding her bike. She's clad in patchy jeans and stars. You figure she must be the dreamer in the family. Road signs warn you of a cattle crossing just around the next curve, and sure enough, there's a herd grazing leisurely along both sides of the bend. And there's one, as always, indecisive about which side it wants to eat on. It is the reason you have to stop. You move on again, and suddenly, you realize there's a flatbed truck that should be coming toward you, but isn't. It's backing up as fast as you're driving, and it disappears over the rise. In an instant, you're at the rise and looking for that truck. You apply your brakes to discover that truck has been vacated in a driveway, and its former occupant is already leaning against a corn combine talking neighborly. He and his friends all wave. Howdy. Many valley farmers have to work on Sunday. A 40-hour work week at the factory or shop supplements their declining profits from crops and livestock. Another curve or two in the road, and the posted danger signs inform you that you're entering property policed by Pinkerton guards. You notice road construction equipment caked with Indiana clay, and instantly it comes to you. You're on PSI land. You pause a moment. Then, as if attracted by some love force, you turn and drive down a narrow, rocky lane that ledges a steep, cliffy nesting ground. It's been sculptured by the ever-changing currents of time. You stop and get out of your car. You walk down to the riverbank, look across the water spreading more than a half mile, and realize you're at the foot of Marble Hill.
When night comes to the river, lend the wind an open ear. It'll tell you if you're quiet, how to spot an occasional deer, and how to find love at the foot of Marble Hill. Yes, how to find love at the foot of Marble Hill. When night comes to the river, in the ripples an open ear. They'll tell you how to spot a barge loaded down with river gear, and how to find love at the foot of Marble Hill. Yes, how to find love at the foot of Marble Hill. When night comes to the river, lend the crickets an open ear. They'll tell you if someone's coming, and if they're far away or near, and how to find love at the foot of Marble Hill. Yes, how to find love at the foot of Marble Hill. When night comes to the river, or lend your baby an open ear. He'll tell you he wants to stick around for at least another year, while making love at the foot of Marble Hill, while making love at the foot of Marble Hill. Yes, there's love at the foot of Marble Hill. Oh, there's love at the foot of Marble Hill.
When you turn off State Road 62 onto 800S, you can't help but see the fruit stand there on the corner. It belongs to Corbett Reed. Corbett is the third of 4 generations of Reeds to work 395 acres of fruit trees and farmland, adjacent now to the site for the proposed nuclear power plant on Marble Hill by Public Service Company of Indiana, Incorporated. The fruit stand looks inviting, so you stop and climb out of your car. You walk up and start fingering the apples and pears and ask what all the squabble's about. Corbett tells you in 5 words as he sees it.
Fight's all about brown rot on peaches.
The fight's all about brown rot on peaches. You tell him that's 7 words, and he says it goes without saying that brown rot's on peaches, but he figured you didn't know that. And he figures you don't know a lot of things about his squabble with Public Service Company of Indiana, Incorporated. Otherwise, you wouldn't call it a squabble. So he invites you into his home, rural white with yellow awnings and surrounded by outbuildings of tobacco and farm machinery. He tells you he's afraid he'll be put out of business if Public Service Indiana operates a nuclear power plant on Marble Hill, 300 yards from his property line. Corbett Reed tells you he's afraid the proposed plant for Marble Hill will change the weather patterns, raise the humidity in the atmosphere, and ruin his fruit. Neither the Nuclear Regulatory Commission nor the United States Department of Agriculture has such a case on file. But Reed says,
I have letters from NRC saying that Marble Hill nuclear power plant would not change the weather patterns in any way. But I have a good friend of mine that's a fruit grower in Michigan by the name of Paul Rood, which lives 3 miles downwind of the Palisades plant at Culver, Michigan. And since this plant has been put into production, well, he has a lot of cloudy days and a lot of wet days. It don't dry off to noon. And this steam going into the atmosphere is what makes all this humidity. So Mr. Paul Rood has already had to taken out all his pear trees and all his brew plum trees on account of this humidity, because brew plums rot so bad. Peaches has this problem.
studies of facts related to a nuclear power plant's effect on the climate are in their infancy. The Nuclear Regulatory Commission's final environmental statement on the proposed Marble Hill power plant concerning atmospheric changes is interpreted as follows. The waste heat from the condensers in the wet cooling towers will be discharged to the environment either through evaporation or directly into the river. The amount evaporated will vary from 60% in winter to 90% in summer, depending on the air temperature. When the heat leaves the towers, it will mix with cooler, less humid ambient air, and the water vapor in the discharge will condense in a cloud-like form called a plume. Under most conditions, it rises and carries along evaporating water and a mist of water droplets called drift. Because large amounts of heat and water vapor are added to the atmosphere, local atmospheric changes will occur. There have been reported occurrences of light snow due to cooling tower plumes. As I said, an undetermined amount of cooling water is carried into the plume and discharged as drift, which causes surface wetting under conditions of high humidity. Studies indicate most, but not all of the drift would fall to the ground within 1,000 feet or so of the towers. When it's cold, the drift that falls to the ground can cause icing. The Division of Site Safety and Environmental Analysis is not able to empirically assess the accuracy or validity of PSI's projected drift because of a lack of detailed drift measurements at operating cooling towers with which to compare. Drift effects are reported as insignificant except in the area within a few hundred feet or so of the towers after general observations. The fact is, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission cannot guarantee Corbett Reed that a power plant on Marble Hill will not be a menace to his fruit trees and crops, nor can Public Service Indiana. Rather than trying to pin down Dr. Harold G. Cassidy's main concerns for the proposed Marble Hill nuclear power plant, you perhaps should be satisfied with just penning some of them down, and at that, it takes a pen with a lot of ink in it. Who is he? You find him listed in Who's Who in Minute Science. He's a professor at large at Hanover College in Indiana. His resume is as complicated and detailed as his life's work, organic chemistry. His professional career is one of explaining very complex issues in a simple way for unscientific minds. It's now time to take out the notebook. Dr. Harold Cassidy is going to explain what radioactivity does to us. I've never known a professor yet who didn't rattle the microphone at the beginning of his lecture.
The world is continually, or we, people, now we're going to just talk about people, are continually bombarded by radiations all the time. These radiations come from outer space. They consist of high energy particles that go ripping down through the atmosphere, knocking electrons out of molecules, ionizing the air, ionizing the molecules along the way, finally slowing down and showering down on the Earth, probably fairly slowly. We are bombarded all the time by radiation. Some of it, as I said, is cosmic. Some of it comes right out of the earth. And practically everywhere you go, the earth contains radioactive materials. And wood probably contains less than stone. So if you live in a stone house, you may get a little bit more radioactivity than if you live in a wooden house. What does it do to us? Well, you can imagine yourself being in the midst of a shower of particles. Some coming up, some coming down, some coming from the sides, whizzing through us. We have no way of recognizing this. But what does happen is these particles can, on occasion, don't ask me how often, hit cells, nuclei of cells, or parts of cells in our bodies. And you can imagine what happens when a high-speed particle with some mass collides with a cell. It's going to break chemical linkages. And one of the theories that is extant is that sometimes, not all the time of course, but sometimes DNA chain is broken. And when it comes back together again, it might come back the way it was before, it might come back in some other arrangement, which would be called a mutant, and the process would be called a mutation. Now that mutant, chances are, is going to be lethal, and the cell will die. But it may not be. It may be something that goes wild and starts the cell multiplying madly, and that would be kind of tumor-like process in which the cell would just multiply madly. It may not make much difference. On the other hand, it may start a chain reaction such that something goes out of kilter. And the process, one process which was directed in a certain direction, turns and is directed in another direction and leads astray. Now normally, we have remarkable recuperative abilities, but we can't recuperate from everything. And so what happens in a situation when we don't recuperate is that the situation gets worse and worse, and it ends up in something that somebody gives a name to, like, say, cancer. Now the nuclear people say, well, it doesn't matter if we have a little more. And here now we come to a metaphysical principle. How much more? I say no more than we already have. We already have put into this atmosphere, into the world, enough radioactive material to be potentially very dangerous.
Dr. Harold Cassidy is a member of Save the Valley Incorporated, one of a dozen opposing groups granted intervener status by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission for the required public hearings on environmental and safety issues. His self-image is one of overseer of the Ohio Valley and River. It's reflected in his home, located high on a hill near the Hanover College campus. He offers a panoramic view with Madison, Indiana, and Louisville, Kentucky just beyond the horizon.
We're against it on aesthetic grounds. We're also against it on health grounds. We already are living in the presence of two big power plants between Louisville and Cincinnati, not counting the ones in Louisville and Cincinnati. This is one of the still remaining beautiful sections of the Ohio, of the once beautiful Ohio, which have not been ruined.
Dr. Cassidy professes that when competent scientists disagree as they do over nuclear power plant safety and design, prudence should dictate. His imagination is inseparable from his knowledge of nuclear science.
There is a military reason for not lining up power plants all down the Ohio River Valley, and especially in the case of the nuclear plant, a very important reason. Let's consider a nuclear plant down here at Marble Hill, which has now been in operation for a year. It now has tons of plutonium and transuranium elements of one kind or another, and all sorts of radioactive material inside of this building. Well contained, says the Regulatory Commission and the power companies, and everything is hunky-dory. But that place is now a prime military target. And let us assume that there is a war. Let us assume that that plant, now a prime military target, is struck by a missile from wherever. What happens then is that those tons of dangerous material are spread over an enormous area. An area which may be as big as or half as big as the state of Indiana, half as big as the state of Kentucky, a great big radius of a 100 or 200, 300-mile radius. That means that all those people have got to evacuate, those that survive it. Furthermore, you see, a single missile striking a nuclear plant is far more effective than a multiple warhead missile, because its devastating effect is tremendous. All these nuclear power plants which we're building in this country make us absolutely vulnerable to any guided missile that is aimed at those power plants. And it's fantastic to try to, it's almost impossible to imagine the kind of thing that would happen under those circumstances. Could you evacuate Louisville? Think of the fellow who is going to come out and say, next week we are going to have a civilian defense model evacuation of Louisville. What do you suppose would happen? At 12 o'clock, everybody drops what he's doing, leave the dishes in the sink. There's a cloud of radioactive material rolling towards us from Marble Hill. What are you going to do? Hop in your car and drive madly as far as you can get? It's quite within the realm of possibility. And I'm not talking about now about a nuclear accident in the plant, which is well within the realm of possibility. I'm talking about some kind of overt action from outside.
The picture Dr. Harold Cassidy paints is placed in the hands of Mayor Harvey Sloan of Louisville. With a willing stroke of stress and concern, Mayor Sloan begins to add detail and sobering colors.
Well, there are a number of concerns. First of all, the plant is being planned 31 miles upstream from Louisville, and obviously we have a deep concern about the safety of this nuclear plant. If there ever needed to be an evacuation, our people in civil defense tell us that it would take from anywhere to 3 to 6 days for us to evacuate in Louisville. Being 31 miles north of here, up the Ohio River, this would not give us any time if there should be a major catastrophe. And that's if everything works smoothly, that if we didn't have any major traffic tie-ups or automobile breakdowns or any major congestion of the main arteries, 3 days would be a minimum. I think we have to understand we have in Louisville itself 27,000 housing units. In Jefferson County, I'm sure we have at least double that. And every one of those housing units are going to have to be individually vacated. People are going to have to be able to get out, have the transportation. Many people don't. They're going to have to be able to take their families. And it's something that's a tremendous undertaking. If there was a meltdown with a release of a significant amount of radioactive material in the air, and if there was a prevailing wind from that direction, and in fairness, I must say the prevailing winds do not come from that direction, but if there was a wind that came from there, and it does, we would not be able to do it in the short period of time that it would take to have this material come to Louisville.
The only bright colors discussed during the mayor's conversation about Marble Hill were the ones on his office walls and the ones in my shirt.
The second large concern we have is what kind of effect this plant and its effluent is going to have on our water. We provide through the Louisville Water Company water for about 1 million individuals in this general metropolitan area. And we're concerned about the safety of that water. We're concerned also about the fact if there should be any adverse air pollution that would emanate from the plant. The third concern, and I think this is one that certainly is unresolved, and the National Nuclear Regulatory Commission does not have an answer, and they've stated so publicly, is how they're going to dispose of the waste and how they're going to transport the waste in a fashion that is not going to adversely affect communities. Of course, we along the Ohio River are very concerned whether they're going to use barges to carry the radioactive material, what kind of safety impact that's going to have adversely on our community if there is an occasion like what happened in 1972 with the chlorine barge and the almost catastrophe they had there with the locks, and what happens when there is a possibility of sabotage of the nuclear radioactive material or its waste by people who want to use it for uses that are going to be detrimental to the community. Another very great concern that I have is the whole issue of the Ohio Valley being used as an energy generating source for the Midwest. We've asked, and I've sent now 3 letters to Mr. Russell Train, the Director of EPA, about an environmental impact study on the 8 different power plants that are planned now for the Ohio River Valley. This includes coal generating plants as well as the nuclear power plant. And they tell us that they will not have this environmental impact study done prior to the licensing of these plants. And in our estimation, this really is not the approach that should be taken. We ought to know what the synergistic or combined effect of all the emissions from the air and to the water from these plants are going to be to our environment. We appreciate the needs of the Midwest, but also we have a deep appreciation of our own environment and the need to maintain it. It appears that there is some thought that in the future decade or two that there may be as many as 100 power plants along the Ohio Valley area for the Midwest, and I don't think we in Kentucky, Jefferson County, or Louisville wish to be the Ruhr Valley for the Midwest of this country.
The Ruhr Valley, which the mayor refers to, is a product of old country negligence. It's the important German mining and industrial region centered on the Ruhr River, which flows into the Rhine. In Chemical and Engineering News for May 17, 1976, an article appears about the advanced state of pollution of the Rhine River and about the attempts of 5 countries, France, West Germany, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Switzerland, to stem pollution and clean it up. The pollution comes from power plants, synthetic chemical industries, and mines with their associated chemical plants. The pollutants range from thermal pollution in the air and water to the worst kind of chemical pollution, non-biodegradable synthetic chemicals and compounds of heavy metals such as mercury and lead. It is estimated that the waste being dumped into the Rhine is equivalent to a freight train load 18 miles long every day. As long as 60 years ago, people complained that the fish being caught tasted of carbolic acid. Today, the few remaining kinds of fish in the Rhine are unpalatable.
As long as we've got inflation, which we're going to be continually facing, we feel, I think this country is, and we've got escalation, and cost of labor and materials and all are going to go up. And I would say that with Marble Hill in operation, that we can show that the cost of a kilowatt hour to produce a kilowatt hour from nuclear on our system is pretty close to 40% less than the cost to generate the same kilowatt hour from coal.
Dr. James Coughlin, a long-term corporate man, is a long-term proponent of nuclear power, whether it be for an electric plant or a submarine, certainly not for a bomb. Dr. James Coughlin has faith in nuclear energy. He professes that it is safe. He equates nuclear power with national economic security. He's a veteran, and he did not vote for President-elect Jimmy Carter. His business life is about paying the bills. In 1974, the day after New Year's Day, Dr. James Coughlin became vice president in charge of the nuclear division of Public Service Company of Indiana, Incorporated.
You see, people forget coal prices don't stay put either. They're increasing. I'll give you an example. We thought in 1973, 72 or 3, evaluating coal and nuclear, that by 1982, in the early 80s, that coal would run about 56 cents a million BTU. That's a unit we use. Right today, here in 1976, it's 65 cents. So we're looking at coal cost of well over $1 in the 80s, compared to, maybe 70 cents for nuclear. Now, I want to make my point clear that due to inflation, if it continues and all, we will be coming in for rate increases in the future. But the size of the rate increase would be considerably smaller with the nuclear plants running than without them.
Dr. James Coughlin likes to talk facts. Facts he can use to defend and promote nuclear safety.
Well, here again, we call it defense in depth. And by that I mean we use a defense in depth in the design, the construction, and the operation, as long as that plant's going to operate, to take every single precaution. And we have redundant systems on redundant systems on redundant systems. And we have stringent quality control, quality assurance requirements. We are inspected almost constantly once the plant goes into construction by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission inspectors and surveillance group. We have our own program. And with all these backup safety systems and all the alarms, and they're all in a very, very conservative design and construction requirements, that we keep that defense in depth approach as our main goal at all times, even in the operation of these plants. So that another thing in the operation of a nuclear power plant, the day it starts until the day we decommission or shut it down because more efficient plants are available, we have a continuous surveillance and inspection program the operators do at these plants. And we operate these plants in accordance with what we call the technical specifications that are approved by the Nuclear Regulatory Commission prior to getting the operating license. See, we got to go through this process again to get an operating license that we're going through now for the construction permit. And the least deviation from those technical specifications must be reported publicly to the NRC, and the public's aware of it. Now, there's no other industry that is required to do this. That could even mean the dial on a gauge being a 1/16 of an inch out of the tech specs. No problem, but it's got to be reported. And what I'd like to people that say that nuclear is not safe is let's talk facts. Let's talk about the record. Since 1957, the first nuclear plant went in service in this country on the Duquesne Light System outside of Pittsburgh. And we have 62 licensed to operate today. Now, if we take the experience we've accumulated with our commercial nuclear power plants, and let me include the Navy, their nuclear plants too, we've got over 2,000 reactor years of operation. There's never been one person hurt or killed from the operation of these plants. And there's no technology known to man that's been more researched, tested, and regulated than the nuclear power industry. And I saw a statistic not long ago that if we take other industries, like commercial aviation, take the automobile industry, and the others, if they had to meet the stringent requirements and regulations that we have to from a safety standpoint, there's not enough money in the world to do it. Take medicine. People using x-ray machines. And it worries me when I go get an x-ray with a technician. And I hope the heck she knows or he knows what they're doing. I don't want to get any more than I have to. So nuclear power has got the safest record of any industry in the world. And that record will be maintained.
In the March 11th edition of the Madison Courier, it was stated that the required public hearings were to be held in the summer of '76. Those hearings have not yet been scheduled. Public Service Indiana now expects the hearings to be held this coming January, early in the month. PSI is also waiting for the results of a third pre-conference hearing scheduled for the 2nd of December. At this pre-hearing, further efforts will be made by the licensing board to consolidate the contentions of a dozen opposing groups recognized by the NRC as legitimate interveners. So when the public hearings themselves begin, there will be more order in the courtroom, so to speak. When the third pre-conference hearing was scheduled by the licensing board, it indicated that the Marble Hill case could become the longest, most argued over on record. A requirement for the vice presidential position of any corporation is keeping your cool when subject to delay. Dr. James Coughlin knows that delay means opposers will be allowed more time to strengthen their legal stands for the public hearings. He knows delay means higher costs for labor, materials, and fuel. He knows delay means frustration in trying to build his first nuclear power plant for Public Service Indiana. That's what he was hired to do.
Now, we're going to have a public hearing in Madison. Our next pre-hearing conference prior to the hearing is December 2nd in Madison. And we look for the public hearing on the environmental issues in early January. And if that hearing board finds that everything's in order and it's favorable, they will grant us what we call a limited work authorization. So we can start some site work, but it's limited and it's at our risk. In other words, if we don't get the full construction permit, which we expect to get in April of next year, then we have to restore the site the way it was. But I'm confident that we're going to get limited work authorization and a full construction permit in April. See, we have to go back then and have a hearing on safety issues if there are contentions by interveners. So far, we've got very little, if any, questions on the safety, which should have, by the environmental groups, been given to the NRC at the same time they gave their environmental concerns and contentions.
I try each day to make headway, but all I get is delay, delay, delay. All I get's delay, 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 delay. Appointments canceled today because there's been more delay, delay, delay. All I get's delay, 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 delay. And I read what the memos say. They say sorry about the delay, delay, delay. All I get's delay, 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 delay. And I hear what the newsmen say, and all mean more delay, delay, delay. All I get's delay, 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 delay. All I get's delay, 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 delay.
Hugh A. Barker is Executive Vice President of Public Service Company of Indiana Incorporated. He'd prefer you call him Al. He's the kind of guy who'll call you from Pittsburgh to tell you he'll have to delay his appointment with you for an hour and a half because he's tied up in a meeting. He too understands that waiting can be translated into costs. He puts a lot of faith in his government. He puts a lot of faith in Nuclear Regulatory Commission documentation. Al Barker is deliberate and cautious. He's an accountant by profession. He has a habit of pounding softly on the conference table with his fist when he talks. He's profound.
The fact is that the nuclear plant is, number one, an economic choice. That's an economic choice for our customers because nobody can pay the bill except our customers. It means, in comparison, lower costs in their electric bill. It is the cleanest, it's the most environmentally desirable means of building to supply energy. Now let's go beyond that, because I think it's important to understand that when we make a choice between a coal plant and a nuclear plant, this is not a mutually exclusive choice as far as our industry is concerned, or as far as we're concerned. We will be probably the state's largest consumer of coal for many, many years to come, and increasing amounts. But the fact is that if we are going to avoid a real catastrophe in this country economically, if we're going to provide jobs, if we're going to provide economic activity, when I say jobs, for our kids, and for those who, by the way, are looking for jobs today, if we're going to get that done, it can't be done without expansion of energy resources.
You immediately sense as soon as you meet Ron Fluge that he's one of those guys who graduated at the top of his class. Your feelings are confirmed when he lays aside his slide rule and starts talking about his former employer, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. During his tenure as a reactor engineer, Ron Fluge scrutinized the construction of 6 nuclear power plant reactors, and he issued the NRC permits for their operation. A month ago, he quit the NRC. Frustrated back home in Jackson, Missouri, he told us that serious dangers have always been connected with nuclear power plants cooled by water under high pressure, as the proposed Marble Hill plant is to be.
When the Atomic Energy Commission was first established, it had the responsibility of not only regulating nuclear power, but promoting nuclear power. The early development of the commercial power reactors was a direct responsibility of the Commission. They provided a lot of the research money and a lot of the early development of nuclear reactors. Well, the concern, and rightly so, was that can the Commission do both? Can the Commission regulate nuclear power, the Atomic Energy Commission? Can it not only regulate nuclear power, but also promote nuclear power and keep the two separate? When would there be a conflict between safety and yet promoting nuclear power? So Congress, several years ago, decided that the Commission should be split, that there should be a separate agency for regulating, a separate agency to promote nuclear power. The result of that split was the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which regulates the nuclear power, and the Energy Research and Development Administration, which is supposed to promote nuclear power. Now the problem has been in the Nuclear Regulatory Commission today is that they still have not done away with the old ideas of continuing to promote nuclear power. The problem is when a person like myself, a technical expert, raises a safety issue which could either delay the licensing of new plants, the scheduled startup of new plants, or which could potentially shut down the ones that are operating, it's very difficult for the Commission to do its function of regulating power. It still feels that it must permit plants to start on schedule. Still promoting. The idea of promoting is still there.
Ron Fluge says he started working on the problem of reactor cooling overpressure in September of 1974.
My job was to review reactor systems, emergency core cooling systems, to ensure that they would perform as designed and that they would provide the necessary protection for the public. The emergency core cooling systems are those systems in the plant that are supposed to protect the public from major failures of the reactor coolant system and major accidents that could occur in the reactor. The major loss of coolant accident, which is assumed to be the break of a large pipe in the reactor coolant system. All the water gets blown out. The worry is that the nuclear core housed inside the reactor coolant system would overheat, melt, with potentially large releases to the public. So we would review the emergency core cooling systems that are supposed to pump in water to ensure that the core does not melt. So we would review systems, the emergency core cooling systems and other systems of the plant.
It wasn't long before problems between Ron Flugie and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission management became obvious.
Throughout 75 and 76, there was a great deal of resistance from my management to allow me to pursue this issue in any great depth, because the possibility of the plants that we had under operating license review, they may not be able to start up. And so they hesitated. As a matter of fact, I was told to take it out of the question list. Now, question lists, when we review a nuclear power plant, we receive a description of the design of that plant. It's my job to review that description. If I determine that there are areas that I think are unsafe or that I have questions about, I'm allowed to ask questions. The applicant then responds to those questions by either telling us that, giving us more information on something we didn't understand, or correcting a design deficiency. I was told on a number of plants to take out of any question list this problem of overpressure by my management, my branch chief, my assistant director, who's my branch chief supervisor.
Accidents have occurred because of equipment malfunction or operator error. Flugie feels his experience with the actual starting up of plant reactors gives him a better feel than management for potential problems.
If we have an accident, the accident we're talking about, there is nothing that the operator can do. It's beyond the design of even the plant systems. What we're talking about in the overpressure transient is that the pressure inside the reactor coolant system is allowed to go so high that it exceeds the design limits for the large reactor vessel. And this reactor vessel holds the nuclear fuel. So what we're talking about is that the pressure, the design pressure of this vessel is exceeded to the point where the vessel could split open. When the reactor vessel splits open, all the water in the reactor coolant system is blown out into the containment. The nuclear fuel can no longer be cooled. All the water is blown out. And the problem is that there are no systems designed into a nuclear power plant to reflood or refill this large reactor vessel with water. They were never designed for it. So this nuclear fuel can no longer be kept cool. It will overheat, and can overheat to the point where the nuclear fuel itself can melt. When it melts, it will melt through the bottom of the reactor vessel, whatever is left of it. Within a day or so, it will melt through the bottom of the reactor containment. Once it melts through the reactor containment, it would get into the water supplies. It could leak out into the atmosphere, and we could be talking about major releases to the public. And there's also the possibility that when this molten fuel falls into this large pool of water that's been blown out into the bottom, that you could have steam explosions to the point where the reactor containment itself could be broken. So you'd have immediate releases to the public, and large releases. It depends on the location of the nuclear power plant with respect to large population areas and the wind patterns. But nevertheless, I think no matter if you're talking about tens of thousands of people or thousands of people or even 10 people, I don't think that the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has the right to jeopardize the lives of even a single person. Any individual should not be susceptible to any danger by nuclear power plants. I asked them, just point blank, if the public were made aware of this problem, how could they justify letting these plants run? And they said they couldn't. The best thing they could do was just to plod along and not do anything, because they knew, and they told me so, we'll never shut down these plants. Who know that we cannot shut down nuclear power plants. The Commission just won't do it. But my concern is, how many more incidents do we have to have within the next year to 2 years to get the Commission to really do something positive? The Commission only learns by accident. And what I mean is, it takes an accident for them to learn and to really do something. There have been, since 1969, 29 incidents in pressurized water reactors where the reactor coolant system pressure was allowed to go beyond the safety limits. These 29 incidents are divided among 16 reactors. In other words, there have been a number of these reactors that have had multiple incidents. And I think the worst plant is the Indian Point Unit Number 2 facility. If anybody, any prudent regulator at the Nuclear Regulatory Commission review the operating experience of that plant, the Indian Point 2, Unit Number 2, they would shut it down. Indian Point Unit Number 2 has had 8 of those 29 incidents. And they have had some of the most severe incidents. They've had an incident at Indian Point Unit Number 3 that went to 2,250 pounds. That's almost 5 times higher than the limit established by the Commission. Fortunately, we have not had a vessel split yet. But materials like steel don't behave rationally. The next incident could blow one of these vessels wide open. Just because you've had 29 doesn't mean that the 30th incident will be okay.
Ron Fluge says he was one of 20 engineers having problems with the Nuclear Regulatory Commission management. Now there are only 19 of them. Ron Fluge is taking a job in cancer research.
I think we need to delay right now the licensing and the construction of nuclear power plants for some short period of time till the members of the scientific community, the management, the technical experts within the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, private individuals like the Union Concerned Scientists have had a chance to really sit down and evaluate nuclear power. I think that the public, that Congress and the President should be made aware of the risks. And then if the public is willing to accept that risk, fine, in light of the economic situation. But at least let the public know what's happening. Right now, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is hiding things from the public, is not giving the public the real facts on nuclear power. Once the public knows the facts, if they're willing to accept the risks, fine. But at least the public knows what's happening. They know what the real risks are.
Well, I've been careful and lucky and just trying to do things right. When I die, I'll just be resting and I'm gonna sleep tight. But my soul won't close its eyes. No, the soul don't close its eyes. I'm living with the changes of the season, and I'm learning the reasons for time. Yet I feel I'm in a cold, dark cellar, and to light it's a long, hard climb. But my soul won't close its eyes. No, the soul don't close its eyes. I'm threading my dreams with a needle and holding things together with a pen, seeking freedom and understanding from the light I can see from within.
The United States isn't the only place where people are debating the pros and cons of nuclear power plants. A controversy such as this one has erupted in many places around the globe. In Whas, West Germany, thousands of citizens occupied a nuclear power plant site. Due to public pressure and protest, the government of New Zealand has permanently halted its nuclear program. In Denmark, there's a 10-year moratorium on nuclear power plant construction. On the other hand, Japan, Iran, Russia, and Switzerland are all going predominantly nuclear. Here in America, this past National Election Day, in states where the nuclear power issue came before the voters, they went for it 2-1. In a 75 Harris poll, 63% of the general public favored nuclear power, 19% were against, 18% were undecided. And the incoming Carter administration has stated nuclear power will take a backseat to other sources of energy. There are numerous issues involved in the controversy over nuclear power that obviously have not been discussed in this program. I could start a list. Nuclear disaster insurance, the decommissioning of a plant after its useful life of 30 to 40 years, waste disposal, and waste reprocessing. Reflective of this controversy is the road construction equipment mentioned in the beginning of this program. It is there to pave the way to the plant if it is to be built on Marble Hill. That construction equipment, like this program, has only scratched the surface of Marble Hill, Indiana.